Okay, welcome to Concept 3.6. This is just putting all of the things we already know together and showing the shifters impacting GDP and price level in the short run. You already know the four shifters of aggregate demand. You already know the three shifters of aggregate supply. This is just applying those to show how they create recessionary and inflationary gaps. So let's get into it. So what are the shifters of aggregate demand? You know them already. It's Sig-Jigson. Consumption plus investment plus government spending plus net exports. Remember, net exports is made up of two elements, exports minus imports. So be careful with that. So there you go. Changes in consumer spending, investment spending, government spending, and net export spending are going to shift aggregate demand to the right or to the left. If there's an increase in any one of those four elements, aggregate demand is going to shift to the right. If there's a decrease in any of those four, aggregate demand is going to shift to the left because we're demanding more or less depending on the spending. That should make some sense. Be careful with that one. The only one that yet is a little tricky on there is imports. They will say, hey, imports increases. How does that affect aggregate demand? It'll actually shift it to the left because we subtract imports from here. So when the thing we are subtracting goes up, then the GDP falls. Okay, there's also three shifters of aggregate supply you know already, which is RAP. Resource prices, actions of the government, and productivity. Resource prices is normally some big resource like oil. They love the oil resource as one of these that many businesses use. Or it's wages. So the wages of employees is a big resource price that impacts all businesses. Actions of the government is normally we're talking about regulation or deregulation, so adding rules or taking rules away, or we're talking about taxation specifically on businesses. So the general rule is it costs to comply. So if there's more regulation, they're less profitable, which means aggregate supply shifts left. If there's less regulation, they're more profitable, aggregate supply shifts right. And then productivity. Productivity goes in one way. When we're more productive because of a change in technology, for example, aggregate supply will shift to the right. Okay, but think about profitability when we're talking aggregate supply. Okay, you know those seven. If you know those seven, this really becomes quite simple. Here we go. So, challenge number one. What is the impact on this nation if a trading partner has a recession? Well, first of all, notice that we're in full employment GDP, triple intersection. Long run average supply is our beacon. It's full employment. It's Mecca. It's where we want to be, right? And our average demand, average supply intersection, wherever that equilibrium point is, that's where our economy currently is. And so we are currently at full employment GDP. Congratulations. If a trading partner has a recession, it means incomes in other nations are falling. If they have less money, they can buy fewer of our exports. When they buy fewer of our exports, net exports, which is one of the four elements of aggregate demand, four elements of GDP too, is going to fall. When net exports falls, you're going to see aggregate demand fall as well. So aggregate demand will shift to the left. When it shifts left, we know already that price level and quantity are going to decrease. What kind of a gap do we have? Well, this is a recessionary gap. Our current GDP is less than full employment GDP. We're not where we want to be. Okay? So that's in the short run. In the long run, that will correct, or we'll do some fiscal policy to try and correct it. But in the short run, we'll fall into a recession. Let's try the next one. Challenge number two, there is a negative supply shock of oil. Now, I use this language on purpose. Supply shock, College Board loves to say this. What does it mean? Shock just means it's unanticipated. The general rule of thumb is if it's anticipated, we know it's going to happen. And so we make sure it doesn't have a negative effect on us. So if we say there's a negative supply shock of oil, it just means there's less oil available. And it's shocking to us. We didn't know it was going to happen. So you can assume that the resource price of oil, the R of oil, has gone up. And when the resource price of oil goes up, many businesses use oil in their production. So aggregate supply is going to shift to the left because businesses are less profitable. So I show that aggregate supply shifting to the left. It raises price level, which is inflation. We know CPI is going from PLE to PL1. So there's inflation going on. It also decreases my output. GDP is going from QY to Q1. So GDP is falling. What do we have? We have stagflation. We have a recession where GDP is low. That's our stagnant part of this. And we have inflation where price level is rising. That's the inflation part of this. Now, we still consider this a recessionary gap. That's what that says down there, recessionary gap, because recessionary gap or inflationary gap or full employment all has to do with GDP relative to where we want to be. Our GDP is lower than full employment in this case. So even with stagflation, we still have a recessionary gap. Okay, so that's aggregate supply shifting to the left because resource prices rose. Challenge number 3. Let's say that interest rates increase hold on. Changes. Decrease. It's going to take me a half an hour to write this, and you're not going to be able to read it. Decrease. Okay. Sorry about that. Let's say that interest rates decrease, impacting investment. Show how this impacts the nation. Now, remember, interest rates are the cost of loans, and investments are giant purchases made on loans by businesses. So, when it costs less to take out a big loan, then I'm more likely to take out that loan. And so, businesses across the nation are taking out more loans than they were before and investing those goods. So, investment rises when interest rates fall. That's a good thing to memorize. Interest rates go down, investments go up. Investment is one of the 4 elements of aggregate demand. It's the IG of Sig-Jigson. So aggregate demand is going to shift to the right. When aggregate demand shifts to the right, it gives us a new price level and a new GDP. Our price level has risen, and our GDP, or our quantity produced within the borders of our nation, has risen. What kind of a gap do we have? This is an inflationary gap. Notice we want to be where LRAS is. That's our beacon. That's our hope. That's where we want to be. We have overshot the mark. We're producing too much, and we can do that temporarily, but it has the potential to cause demand pull hyperinflation, which is indicated by PLE going up to PL1. That's our inflationary gap. Notice you simply take those elements of GDP and you apply them. Let's try this one. This is a little bit of a format switch for you. Which of the following will most likely occur as a result of an increase in labor productivity in an economy? What are we talking about? Well, people, our laborers, are more productive with the same resources. Normally, this is indicating a change in technology. So if I give somebody a new machine, a new labor assist, they can be more productive. Whatever, doesn't matter. We know that P is an indicator of aggregate supply. It's the P of rep. It's our productivity. So if they've been more productive, what's happening in our economy? Well, I can draw it like this. AD. We have AS. We have price level. And we have real GDP. I'm just going to put quantity down here for the sake of time. We have initial GDP, which is right here, P1, and here, Q1. And we've indicated that productivity has risen. When we're more productive, aggregate supply, businesses are more profitable. When businesses are more profitable, aggregate supply is going to shift to the right. When the aggregate supply shifts to the right, we're AS2. We have a new equilibrium down here. Our price level is going to fall from P1 to P2, and our GDP is going to rise from Q1 to Q2. Just chicken scratch down here. So let's check it out. What's our correct answer going to be? Our correct answer, of course, is going to be A, an increase in output and a decrease in inflation. Because aggregate supply, the P of RAP, has gone up, aggregate supply is going to shift right, price level is going to fall, GDP is going to rise. This is actually a precursor to economic growth. We'll talk about that later, though. That's it for this unit, or not unit. Definitely not it for this unit. For this section, check out 3.6, changes in ADAS model in the short run on Khan Academy. See you soon.